Every heroic journey has sacrifices. Every person has moments in their life where they have to make tough decisions.
It's intense. It's emotional.
Hard fights and bitter losses and stuff.
Something about making the decisions, right or wrong, good or bad.
So, how do you want to do this?
Welcome back to D&D Beyond, and you know the game, you know there's dungeons, you know there's dragons, but what waits at the end of that process? Today we are putting the treasure in Treasury, and we are talking about hordes, dragon hordes specifically, in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. And here to talk about that with me is a DM extraordinaire, an amazing human, a very fun and talented creator and performer and streamer. Please welcome from the guild, from Failsafe, from everywhere, Vince Casso. How you doing?
Hi, good. Good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk goodies.
It's just an all treats stream. I feel like it's an early Halloween thing. It's like I show up with a giant
That's
bag
true.
and you put magic items in it, right? That's how this works?
Tricks and treats. The way that I do it, it's very often both.
Well, that will be very on point. So Fizban's Treasure of Dragons is coming out October 26th. You can pre-order it right now, and I'm just saying you should, because we have some very cool pre-order perks for that book, including the Dragon Egg dice set here at D&D Beyond, which I'm extremely excited about. But when that comes our way, it's going to have a ton of information on dragons, on the mythology of dragons, on the habits and personalities of dragons, on the many kinds of dragons, on the places they live, and, of course, essentially, on the stuff you might find there. So recently, a preview came out that we can talk about for some of the details of how that will work and look in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons over at IO9. And we got a look at how it breaks down there. The goal they had with this, they were saying, is to make it a little more interesting. When you're a DM and you're like, oh, you find some gold. How do you make that fun and compelling and unique to the place that you're finding it or the person who gathered it? So like what various nations might have minted the coins in the hoard, or what kinds of art objects do sapphire dragons prefer? Things like that let it reveal story. Of course, we have this wonderful preview. Vince, do you have this one handy? Could you read this in your best Fizban impression?
Oh my god, I don't know who that is. So I
It's
can
okay,
give
it's
it
okay.
I can give it a shot.
You know what? I've been dying to test it out, so let's find out.
Please do. Go right ahead.
Great piles of coins are all well and good, but the best treasures are the ones with memories attached. Let me tell you about my collection of pie plates.
It's uncanny, truly.
And of course, as a refresher for folks, Fizban the Fabulous is a character from the Dragonlance novels who serves as our narrator for this book and our guide to the world of dragons. And he is an old man with a twinkle in his eye and a whole lot of secrets that connect him to this dragon lore in some very direct ways. So I'm very excited for folks who don't yet know him to meet him in the pages of this book, but also to learn from him all this cool stuff coming our way. And what we get in this section, just as a quick overview, is a look at how it's going to expand on the Dungeon Master's Guide information about treasure tables. So it starts, of course, as your best friend, the DMG, is always there for you, to start out with the guidance for treasure tables and what kinds of things you find in a hoard, and how valuable they probably should be to sort of help guide your choices as a DM. But you get things like the kinds of treasure section in here. Use these guidelines in conjunction with the information in the DMG to detail the treasures in a dragon's hoard. Feel free to swap coins, gems, and art objects in a dragon's hoard for different items of equivalent. Perhaps a sapphire dragon takes great pride in a hoard full of raw sapphires and jewelry featuring sapphires, or a copper dragon might love sleeping on a vast bed of copper coins. And specifically in this preview, we do get our first look at one of the tables that we'll find in the Fizban's Dragon Horde section. So, Vince, would you please grab a D10 for me?
Oh, yes, certainly. All right. Gonna give this sucker a roll. And we have a 6.
We have a 6, which means the coins in the Dragon's Horde, which could come from all over the world or any age or any era. In this case, they are coins from a nearby contemporary culture. So not an ancient one, not another dimension, but a neighboring city, which means you get to ask, all right, how did they get here? What might this tell us? Will they spend easily? Will they be difficult? It just gives you ideas about treasure. Vince, that was a huge info dump. I'm very excited about these possibilities. What so far jumps out to you as a DM about how you might want to use these tools?
Well, a few things, actually. And I think for me, one thing that I like about all this is because I exclusively DM homebrew. I only DM homebrew content and campaigns. So it's a lot of the lore is very much contained and self-generated. And so uh, these roll tables and these tools allow you to bring a lot of additional flavor and a lot of variability to something that can inherently grow a little bit, not stale, but you can run into the issue in homebrew where because it's all just sort of coming from you and your players, you run the risk of getting a little bit repetitive, a little bit tropey sometimes. And so these things help to really shake it up and force you to think outside the box. Even something like you mentioned how I rolled a 6 and the result is coins from a nearby contemporary culture. These are the kinds of coins you might expect to be in a Dragon's Horde because they are contemporaneous with the time you're currently in and they're from not terribly far away. But even in that, it gives you the opportunity to tell a story. If, for example, you thinking of it from a utilitarian point of view, if you wanted to get your player characters to a certain part of the world that's not terribly far away, this can be, there's a bag of coins with a note attached. It was sent by the lord of a nearby realm as payment for a bounty that never arrived at its destination and was, intercepted by the dragon instead. And then that gives you a mystery to solve in that nearby area, or any like infinite number of permutations of how that could still affect your tale, even being something as banal as like modern coins from a few miles west. And I like that. And then you also have the options of, coins from another world, coins from, ancient sources, from worlds away. And yeah, really, for me, because D&D is fundamentally, and this is coming, of course, from someone who's extremely RP focused. D&D is a game that is like 80% flavor, if I'm being totally honest. It's like 80% flavor, 20% mechanics for me, because the mechanics are what they are and they don't tend to change. But what you bring to your descriptions, the way that you imbue those mechanics with life and improv and interest, is what creates that story. And this just gives you more license, more of an excuse to get a bit creative with something that, like you were saying, can be very sort of ordinary. Of it's a dragon horde, it's a pile of crap, like it's a pile of
Get
treasure.
money, write it down.
And
Go
there
to
you
the
go.
shop. The end.
Yeah.
I love that. That's fantastic. And I love that the gap between I would like to make this more interesting, but I'm not sure how, is the gap that this stuff steps into. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's never going to stop you if you already have your own, like, I need them to get this specific thing, so it'll lead them in this direction. But if you're like, I just want it to be cool, how do I make it cool? These guidelines are here to help you be like, aha. Also, that's a great plot hook, finding the undelivered bounty. That's fabulous.
And it's like you're never.
we get-
One important
Yeah.
thing also, because this is a lesson that I learned early on as a DM, and it's one of the best lessons you can learn, is you are also never constrained by these things. Like I'll often roll on tables like this, or just in general, and I'll see what comes up, and I'm like, I don't like that, but it gives me a different idea. Like I'll just do something completely different, but still, it was the fact that you wanted to introduce some randomness to it that sparked some idea you wouldn't have had, even if you don't go with the thing you landed on. Again, you're the DM. You're the boss. Just whatever you want to do is fine. These are like great inspirational tools for you to tell whatever story you do want to tell.
Perfectly put. Sometimes you don't know what you didn't want until it's like this. And you're
Yeah.
like, no, no, no. Actually, from another world. Let's do this.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
we get some more hints also of what's going to be in this section for helping define the treasure and why they would bother sort of like putting a lot of emphasis here. I mean, partly there's the practical, you find something, what did you find? You got to have a way to answer that. But specifically, and I love this for the overall approach of Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. James Wyatt and the other leads on the project have talked about the way that dragons are mythological creatures who carry with them a lot of these associations, and those associations ought to mean something. So we've talked
Mhm.
about the fact that their layers will shape the world around them because of the magical nature of dragons. They will affect things around them, and that creates interesting gameplay possibilities, but it also reinforces the idea behind what a dragon is and how it exists in the world. And extending that to the treasure, that the treasure could be affected by that dragon, could be particular to that dragon, could carry forward into the world effects from that dragon, is just delicious, delicious possibilities, both for story and gameplay value. So we get some hints like dragons often divide their hordes among different layers, and potentially, if a dragon has multiple hordes, it could have a set of things that's in all of those. Which I don't know
Mhm.
about you, Vince, but I'm like, well, that sets my brain tickling. Gotta catch them all.
Yeah. For sure. One thing that it also mentioned, maybe you're even planning on getting to this, but the thing that stood out the most to me was, this concept of the horde, the layer and its contents effectively being an arcane focus for the magic of the dragon, kind of like what you're touching on there. And it's such a fun idea for me because that this whole thing, because I'm also like in terms of magic systems, I'm also a big fan of like highly representative and symbolic spell casting. And one of the biggest inspirations for me in terms of the way that I like to handle magic in homebrew settings and in homebrew worlds is if you've seen or read the book or seen the show, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a wonderful, wonderful series that handles magic in a very old school kind of 18th century, almost hermetic kind of way, and where there's a lot of like symbology, representations of things. And so the idea that, and of course, you can flavor it however you want as a DM, but as an example, if the horde itself has things that are of value to specific people in certain emotional ways, if it's filled with sentimental artifacts, not just treasure that has a monetary value, you're able, as the dragon in this case, the dragon is able to focus more power from this because it draws on the emotions and mental energies of the people of this realm, and is sort of like siphoning a bit of their power to create this magical effect in that layer. Yada 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 yada. And so then you get into a lot of juicy flavor from what the treasure can represent to the dragon as a conduit of magic and not just as a treasure.
That's beautiful. We were talking about that series recently because we were getting real excited about Witchlight and Feywild possibilities and all
Mm,
representations of fairies. But I have not yet
yeah.
dived in myself, so you're making it sound delicious.
It's
Um,
such a good show. It's so much fun.
So, more things that we know are coming about the Dragon's Horde is that there could be things like the Horde carries the dragon's magic after the fact, or even when it
Mm.
leaves. So you could have a gemstone from a Black Dragon's Horde that pollutes any water it touches, or, and this is fun, maybe the treasure is haunted or cursed, or its magic is needed to help repair a dead magic zone in the world. So what would you do with a cursed or haunted treasure, DM
Now this
Benskazo?
is fun. Because you can go, and there's nothing wrong with this. This is perfectly valid. You can go with the simple construct of like this item conveys a particular flavored debuff to the holder or to the party. But I'm always a big proponent in all things loot, in all things that which is carried by the party to tell a story with it and work it specifically into the backstory and the ability for the individual player character to have more agency in the actual narrative. And so for me, it will be something that connects to a journey the character is already taking. As a random example, if we've established that a character has an origin from a particular cult run by a specific archdevil that they've escaped from in the past, the cursed item could be something that was minted during the earliest days via a sacrifice to that archdevil in like the mythic era of this world. And so to them, it has a specific negative effect or a specific implication for their character that it wouldn't have for another player. If someone else is holding it, they may feel no effect. This player does. And that begs a question of why is it affecting you and how can we unravel that mystery? And then, of course, you as the DM know all these answers. You can keep all those secrets and divulge them over time, bit by bit, as the story unfolds. And then it's not as much about the treasure. The treasure was a facilitation for a story that now the players get to tell themselves. And that's a big part of how I DM is just how do we work your story in there and how do we let you take a big dose of agency in the campaign.
I love that. So, what is in general, if you set out to be like, all right, I want to send out some player rewards, how do you
Mhm.
approach brainstorming for that as a DM?
Depends on the show. Because one of the shows that I DM called Failed Save is obviously is a comedy series. And so I make most of the items that we dish out up on the spot, and they are absolutely goofy, absurd, bonkers, just ridiculous. We do also, have a little bit of lore heavy stuff once in a while, but it's primarily just for the comedic value. Um, and so I'll dish out in that case, in the case of like a comedy, I'll give out an item that is still sort of customized to the player receiving it in a way that I think is very funny for them. Like we gave the zero dex clumsy turtle cleric the ability to fly in like 30-foot spurts. And so we just basically have like turtle ping pong for a little while. And that's, as opposed to giving it to the Aarakocra, which makes no sense because the Aarakocra can fly already. We make the turtle fly, and it's hysterical. Whereas on a drama, like a show that I'm producing right now with Pixel Circus, where we're looking at heavier lore, heavier plot, um, I like to set things up for the future. And this is not always the case. I will just give out like a magic item, and it's like, it's a cool +1 dagger, has a cool bonus effect you can unlock by either getting to a certain part of the story, taking it to a certain location, having it identified, or like having its magic released by a talented mage or scholar. But I like to set things up for the future. So I'll dish out something like, a blank book, all of its pages blank, but weathered as though they'd been written in and erased 1,000 times over 1,000 years, with the embossed image of a golden dome on the cover. Every time you open the book, you're able to just barely decipher a sentence or two that just sort of blinks in and out before your eyes, giving you a splitting headache and giving you just a tiny bit of insight into what the book might once have said. Then you realize 3 campaigns later, and I'm talking about an actual real item right now from that story, but you realize 2 years later, 2 real years later, in the 3rd campaign of that anthology, that the book had X, Y, and Z significance and is now telling you this part of the story that had been hinted at the entire time. And so I like to plot out things like that, typically a couple years in advance, and then let the payoff come in bits as you pursue the narrative.
Incredible. What ideas did you have? Like, I want to know everything about the book. What other ideas did you have in reading through this, or what are you hoping to grab from this section? If you get Fizban's Treasury of Dragons.
I think the biggest thing for me is because there are a lot of ways in which you can bring life to a world, whether that's one that already exists in or adjacent to the Forgotten Realms, or it's something like My World of Boros that is entirely homebrewed. And a few of the key ways you can bring life into it is to develop it culturally. And that includes things like historical timelines, and also, in big part, things such as food and, most importantly, coinage, currency, trade, and economic systems. And that's a big thing that I've been developing lately for my world across history is what are their systems of economy and commerce and governance? How do they actually run their civilizations and cultures long term over thousands of years? And thus, currency is a huge part of that. Now, of course, you're not being a bad DM if everybody uses gold, silver, copper, electrum, platinum, what have you, coins. That's totally valid. the cultures may have every reason to use those coins, but you can also ask yourself, hey, if two cultures from different parts of the world that grew up in different climates and sociological situations were to evolve independently of each other, how might they differ in those ways? And then thus, how might the horde of a dragon or some creature that collects wealth or collects treasures like that reflect the history of this entire world? I've got a culture that is exists in this desert climate, very almost like sub-Saharan climate, where the sand is able to focus the light of the moon in such a way that it creates these little dollops of melted sand throughout the dunes that harden into these ever so slightly magical small glass discs that you can't create by hand. They can only appear naturally, and thus those are used as currency because they can't be replicated and they're quite valuable as both a magical focus and just as an object itself. That's very different from a coin that you can mint out of gold or something like that. Also, because if you're living in a desert environment in oasis cities, you're not going to be mining veins of precious metals for the most part. And so, again, you can then take the inspirations from these roll tables, from these books, and say, okay, how can this actually tell me something about the world that I'm actually playing in? How can this give me inspiration to make the world that I'm creating more alive, more interesting, and thus more immersive for my players? Because that's really the whole game as the DM.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Not to go
Oh,
in a
the
whole
sound-
like dissertation there.
No, this is why I wanted you to come on the show. That was wonderful, and now I want a little glass disc from the desert. It sounds really gorgeous. We have some questions coming in from chat, so let's see.
Awesome.
Thank you all for passing these along. And first off, an extremely important D&D Beyond question. I'm sorry, but we must know, what is your favorite dinosaur?
What's my favorite dinosaur?
We have certain traditions.
That's hysterical. Okay, so legit, I grew up with the watching all through my childhood the what do they call Walking with Dinosaurs. This whole like video series, like early CGI technology, that told stories of the lives of these dinosaurs in like a first person narrative, like a nature documentary, like Meerkat Manor, but for dinosaurs essentially. Like, yes, chat remembers that as well. It was such a great series. And there were so many that stood out. One of the first for me, I think, that I really liked is I'm googling the picture now. Yeah. Um I remember them featuring in the docuseries as well, is the Allosaurus. Because they're fighty and they're like toothy and daggery, and like they're not as small as, and by the way, like raptors, the velociraptors as you understand them don't look the way they look in Jurassic Park. Obviously, that is a lot of literary creative license there. They're quite small actually. But this is like about twice the height of a normal human, not as big as a T-Rex and thus super unwieldy, but can still definitely chase you down and like gobble you up. And so yeah, like I used to be really big into dinosaurs when I was a kid. Also, who wasn't? Like, I feel like if you didn't have a dinosaur phase as a kid, I mean, you got to go back and get that one done, because you probably didn't have.
Never too late to have your
Yeah,
dinosaur
never too late.
phase, and
Never too
it
late.
doesn't ever have to end if you don't want it to. But amazing. Okay, let's see. We had interesting question from one of our mods, Aaron Lore. Would you personally use the next lower table for a horde if the players chose to get around the fight through diplomacy as a gift or the like? This is, of course, a reference to in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there are tables and they're divided up by the challenge ratings of the monsters. And I can really see going either way on this. What would you personally do?
It's an interesting question because I'll be totally honest. For me, roll tables are very, very, very strictly just guidelines, and loose ones at that. So typically I'll roll on a table, like I was saying earlier, to give me a rough idea of like the ballpark I want to be in, and then I'll make something up anyway. That's just how I usually do it. Now, to the question of, would you possibly give your players something a bit less valuable or of slightly less import based on the way they got around the situation? Honestly, probably not. If they have access to the horde is the horde. It's what it is. Now, this would change if the dragon was, for example, if they went via diplomacy and social interaction, and the dragon offered them something from the horde, well, then you have to think, what is the dragon choosing to offer them? That might not be as valuable as them just like digging through piles of Scrooge McDuck-esque, coin dunes. But in general, I like to reward my players for any creative solution to a problem. And I'm very, very specific that fighting is not the only way through. In fact, in my usual sessions, there's combat maybe once every other game at the most. Like, it's mostly role play. Because generally speaking, if you really think about it, even in a high fantasy setting, most folks aren't getting into pitched life or death combat on a daily basis. That's a lot. So for me, it's a lot of role play. And so social resolutions are 100% on the table. And in some cases preferred because I think they make for more interesting interactions.
Absolutely. Let's see. We have Dark of Night says, if adventurers looted your personal hoard, what kind of aesthetic would they find, and what lingering effect would it leave?
What kind of aesthetic? Uh,
Just sapphires all the way down?
just nothing but sapphires. Well, it was what lingering. Oh boy, I'm not sure how much I can say on this channel. But let's see. My aesthetic, my horde's aesthetic, would probably be something, if I'm honest, quite minimalist and clean. And it's hard to say I'd even have a horde, if I'm honest. You can ask my girlfriend. I had to be like, twist my arm to even begin decorating my own house. Like, I'm the kind of guy who I get a bed and a couch and there's like a TV and a dining room table, and I'm like, there's stuff in this house. Like, we're furnished. And she's like, oh my God, would you not be like that, please? We need to actually make this place look nice. So my horde would be like a foot tall and 6 inches wide of like just trinkets and knickknacks I picked up from my travels that I thought were kind of neat. They'd have almost no value. They'd be entirely sentimental. And as you stole them and made off into the night, you'd perceive a lingering sense of sadness as you've broken my heart because they were so important to me.
I love that. Curse of gentle disappointment. Just carried forward on your players. It just gives you disadvantage on selected skill checks. Really,
This
is all it
knickknack
does.
is just kind of bummed out.
Favorite ridiculous magic item that might be found in a horde, or at least one example that comes to mind from Arcane Faith.
Oh, hi, Ash. Well, okay. There's one item that I gave away that I still think it's simple. It's so simple, but it's one of the favorite things I've ever given away. And I actually got this idea from online, and they're called. You know what? I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna give two. There's there's the bagpipes of stealth, which anyone who's gone through like homebrew magic loot tables online has encountered this. They make you invisible only so long as they're being played. Fantastic. Another one that I actually gave away in a game is called the boots of these goddamn laces. Because every time you want to roll, you can dash as a free action, but you roll a d4. On a 1 or a 2, you successfully move twice your movement without sacrificing your action. Or on 3 and 4, you just fall flat on your frickin' face. And we also gave that to the turtle in failed save. And she uses it in at least every other game. And it's very special.
Incredible. Toyota Canada, what's the first horde you will build, or is this spoilers?
I'll tell you actually. So I'm also big on like subverting expectations. So like for example, for me, if you encountered the horde of some great creature such as a dragon or something similar, it wouldn't necessarily be a giant pile of golden treasure. It might be something like this dragon specializes in acquiring information, acquiring things like social contracts, making deals or IOUs, things that are owed to the dragon by other people in the realm. The dragon is then able to like transfer those debts to you as a matter of you looting this horde. Just any way in which you can take the expected of we're going to get a lot of treasure from this and turn it into something the players have not really encountered before, and that gives you a lot more story you can tell from it. In a couple of shows that I am making right now, there are going to be troves of treasure, and they will always be not quite what the players expected.
Oh, that's so exciting. Let's see. Sellsword's Barrage. This actually might pertain to what you just said. If I'm running a campaign without legendary or high magic items, how can I still make a dragon's horde feel rewarding?
Yeah, it's a good question. I I do like I love to run in like low to mid magic settings. And so for me, a lot of the ways you can make those things interesting is if you're like obviously a lot of stuff we've already talked about is very much of that bent, like even just moving away from treasure entirely. But if you still wanted to keep treasure that is powerful, but not like legendary or epic magic, there's a couple ways you can go with that. Number one, you can give it a lot of historical, cultural, or personal significance. Maybe it's an artifact that is extremely important to the history of this place or is recognizable to the party as being such, or something that is near and dear to an individual in the actual group themselves. Because emotional significance, personal significance is, I think, just as potent as just giving it more potent, honestly, than just giving it like a good stat block. Um, there's also the fact that there's a lot of ways to use magic in smaller ways that are extremely utilitarian. Maybe there's some kind of like, they find an herbalism kit or an apothecary kit that is able to make a specific type of potion found nowhere else if they can only find the ingredients and a lost tome that describes the recipe. That is magical. It's not epic magic, and it gives the player something to do. There's a lot of options like that.
Oh, that's amazing. I will also say, it's, I think that if you are looking at these questions, do not neglect the resources that are to hand to you in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which have definitions for, like, what do we mean by an art object? Oh, like an idol made of solid gold, a necklace studded with precious stones, paintings of ancient kings, bejeweled dishes. Art objects include all these and more, and there are enormous tables. Don't let them intimidate you, but as Vince is saying, let them inspire you to sort of see the variety and types of things that you might be able to plant for your players without you having to reconstruct from memory the contents of an art museum. You know what I mean?
For sure.
There's just really wonderful suggestions for random things that you can encounter, and the Dungeon Master's Guide is full of them. There's an entire chapter on treasure. If you have maybe not looked at it in a while, refresh your memory with some delightful suggestions from the DMG. Hmm? Vince, final thoughts. What are you looking forward to, and where can the people find you?
Well, quite a few things, actually. You can stay tuned with all of my goings on my socials. I am at Vince Casso on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Twitch, where I do also stream gaming content, not just D&D, but all kinds of stuff. However, for most or right now all of my D&D content, I would tune in to twitch.tv/Pixel Circus, where you can catch my show Failed Save. We just wrapped campaign 1. Amy also was a guest on that show. A wonderful character, Cat Cavalier. Oh my God. Y'all, if you want to see Amy's character both like played by her and also run as an NPC have just like the most ridiculous amount of influence on our plot, check out campaign 1 of Failed Save, the first 3 seasons.
You were such a generous GM. Sorry. If you want to if you want to know how to make a guest feel really special and have a great time at your table, please go check out that episode of Failed Save. But continue.
And yeah, we're also producing a new series over there that I'll be DMing in my homebrew world. We'll be releasing more information on that bit by bit slowly, but long story short, it is what I like to call the main plot line of this entire world. It's the full story that I've always wanted to tell, and we'll be now digging into the actual meat and potatoes of my world of Boros. Again, stay tuned on my socials and on Twitch, twitch.tv/Pixel Circus to see everything that I'm doing over there.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. And if you watch this and you're excited to get your hands on some glittery, shiny, delightful treasure suggestions, you're going to want to grab Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, which is coming our way October 26th. And once again, has some extremely cool pre-order perks to go with it if you happen to pick it up between now and then, like the Dragon's Egg dice set, which you got to look at this morning on the dev update, and which are just really, really beautiful. In addition to the other things that'll come with that. So I hope you'll check it out. I hope you'll have your own fabulous ideas for Hordes and Treasure for your home games, or to pass this to your DM and be like, I would like one of those, please. Be gentle with
Do
your
this,
DMs, I'm just saying.
please.
Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time on D&D Beyond.
It's D&D.